Just because the alternator doesn't spin doesn't mean it's bad. When you see how easy it is to recover an alternator, you're gonna kick yourself for spending 70 bucks on a used one or 130 on a new one. This Honda Pilot sat for a couple months. Just from sitting, this alternator can seize because the tolerances are too tight inside. There's an old alternator that's seized. To unseize an alternator, you don't even have to take it off your car. In fact, it's just as easy to leave it on the car. I'll show you on this alternator where the problem is. It's around the stator, not the bearing. If you put a little bit of motor oil or transmission fluid in there, just let it soak in. Now you can put a socket with a breaker bar on there and just work it back and forth. If the alternator's on the car, just squirt oil into the alternator. Now you can spray quite a bit of oil in there because the oil will not damage the windings. I find that old motor oil works just fine. Because this alternator seized up, it burned this belt completely off. When I turned this engine over with the alternator all seized up, there was smoke, there was squealing. You can see this pulley is seized. We'll go ahead and start with this socket and this breaker bar. Just start moving it back and forth. The hardest part is to get that first movement and then jiggle it back and forth. And you may be thinking, I'll just get a new alternator. I've seen this problem so often, don't do it. I've done this technique and 2 and 3 years later, it's still running like a top. You can see it's starting to move a little bit. It's a lot easier to go ahead and unseize this than it is to put in a new one. Once everything starts spinning, you can go ahead and use a ratchet. Eventually, it'll start to feel like it was brand new again. Nice and smooth, and we didn't even remove the alternator. Now, with this one, we put a new belt on because the old one burned off. Go ahead and give it a crank, and everything will be just like new again. So if somebody says your alternator's all seized and you need a new one, well, you don't. And if you're gonna switch out the old one, keep it. 70 bucks is 70 bucks. So just because your alternator won't spin doesn't mean it's bad. You want to start your car from time to time or this is going to happen again. Now if you start your engine and you hear squealing within your alternator, now that could be the bearing behind the pulley. Now rebuilding an alternator is a whole nother deal. Now finding good documentation on how to rebuild an alternator is a bit of a trick too. If you click on the description, I'll leave some links on where to get some decent manuals. Now under the pulley, you'll be able to feel the shake on the bearing. Now the alternator's not going to typically seize at the bearing, it's going to seize at the stator. So you want to work the oil right down in here. Even a small amount of corrosion will seize up your alternator. So when the oil soaks in, you'll be able to break it loose right around here. So before you do what's logical and get yourself another alternator, save your money and do something else that's a little more fun. I've had some folks still just buy an alternator anyway. So I loosened up their old one and I said, if it ever goes bad, we'll put it in. And years later, it's still running just fine. And the one they bought is still sitting on a shelf. When you put this oil on, it'll probably smoke for about 10 minutes. Now, if you've got an alternator that's just been sitting outside and it's really corroded, you may have to take a couple days of soaking it. A little bit of oil and a little bit of time is a lot cheaper than a new alternator. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.